A carriage climbs the hills of Devonshire beneath a sky heavy with mist. Inside, a woman sits in silence, unwanted, unseen, sold into a marriage forged not by love, but by desperation. She carries no dowry, only the weight of a name whispered with pity, and a secret sketch folded close to her heart. At the gates of Ashthorne Hall, the fog thickens. A duke waits within, blind, wounded, and unaware that the bride sent to him walks with a limp and a past she has never spoken aloud. Will duty chain them both to loneliness, or will something far deeper rise from the shadows? Tell us, where in the world are you listening from? And what is it about period romances that captivates you most? Bath, England, January of the year 1814. The sky hung low with mist, and the air carried the stillness of something left unsaid. In the drawing room of a modest house along Queen Square, a woman sat as still as a portrait, unmoving, unblinking, while the crackle of the fire failed to warm the chill nesting in her chest. Agnes Bell was 26 years old. Neither beautiful nor ugly, she existed in the quiet space where society forgot to look. Her hair, a soft shade between chestnut and auburn, was pinned in a modest chignon, with a few curls brushing the pale skin near her temples. Her eyes, grey-blue and watchful, held the patience of someone who had learned long ago not to expect much of the world. A faint constellation of freckles dusted her cheeks and nose, and the corners of her lips turned downward, as if even her smile had grown weary of waiting. She wore a dove-grey muslin gown, high-waisted, with long sleeves and a white fichu neatly tucked at her collar. The fabric, though clean, had lost the crispness of its youth. Her cloak, a charcoal wool garment mended more than once, rested across her lap like a shield. In her gloved hands, folded with quiet tension, she held a sealed letter she had read a dozen times. It was a marriage contract, a lifeline, a sentence. Her father, once a gentleman of modest comfort, had gambled away what little fortune remained. The last of the family jewels had been sold. Her younger sister had already been promised to a merchant's son in Portsmouth. Agnes, plain, limping Agnes, was the only remaining coin with which to barter salvation. She had been offered to a duke, not just any duke, the Duke of Devonmere, Gregory Ashbourne, a man whose name once resounded through salons and military camps alike. A cavalry officer decorated for bravery, a widower, a recluse, and now blind. She had not been asked if she accepted, only informed. The carriage would come at dawn. Now, the hour had arrived. Mrs. Arding, the housekeeper who had once nursed Agnes through fever, stood in the doorway, her eyes red with unspoken worry. "The coach is ready, miss." Agnes rose carefully. Her limp, though not severe, lent her gait a softness, like a sigh in motion. She held her head high as she had learned to do and walked to the mirror above the hearth. She looked at her own reflection and found nothing to fear, only the echo of a life unlived. In the courtyard, the carriage waited beneath a curtain of fog. The horses, black and restless, snorted into the morning frost. The coachman tipped his hat respectfully, though his eyes avoided hers. No one ever met her eyes for long, not in Bath. Her trunk had been packed with 3 wool dresses, 1 pair of kid gloves, a sketchbook with frayed edges and a single violet ribbon, her mother's ribbon. The rest had been sold years ago. As the wheels turned and Bath receded behind them, Agnes pressed her gloved fingers to the windowpane, feeling the cold seep through the glass. Trees passed like ghosts. The road unfurled ahead, winding toward Devonshire and into the unknown. She did not cry. She had shed all her tears years ago when she first understood that beauty would never be hers, nor courtship, nor the gaze of a man who lingered. What awaited her now was not romance, but necessity, a title, a roof, perhaps silence. But deep within her, beneath layers of patience and resignation, a thread of something nameless stirred. Not hope exactly, but something close. The journey took 2 days. On the second evening, the road narrowed into wild moorland, where frost clung to every branch like lace. Dusk settled slowly, and the driver lit a lantern at the front of the carriage. "Nearly there, Your Grace," he called out by habit, not conviction. And then, through the thickening fog, she saw it. Ashthorne Hall. It did not rise like a home. It loomed like a memory. The estate was built in pale stone, its many gables crowned with slate, its windows tall and dark. Ivy clung to the southern face like a lover unwilling to let go. A great iron gate creaked open at their approach, revealing a snow-dusted courtyard and a waiting figure in black, silent, still. Agnes stepped down onto the gravel. Her boots crunched faintly. No welcome was spoken. Only the door opened. A woman in a navy wool dress and mob cap, grey-haired and firm, nodded once. "I am Mrs. Gilbride, housekeeper." She said it like a judgment. "This way, if you please." Agnes followed. The corridor stretched long and quiet. Oil paintings stared down from gilded frames. Candles flickered in wall sconces, but no warmth reached the air. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, weighted by absences, by footsteps that once echoed and no longer did. At the far end of the hall, a voice spoke. It was deep. Dry, not unkind, but hollowed. "She has arrived, then." Agnes turned her face toward it, but saw no one. The housekeeper replied, "Yes, Your Grace, she is here." Silence again. Then the voice, closer now, though its owner remained unseen. "Let her rest. We'll speak when I am ready." Agnes nodded, though no one watched. And so, she was shown to her chamber. A grand room, furnished with carved walnut, damask curtains, and a fireplace that barely whispered heat. She stood by the window and watched the fog swirl around the manor like a breath held too long. A duchess, a stranger, a woman unseen. She laid her hand on the sill, and for the first time her fingers trembled. The moon rose above the moor, pale and cold, and Agnes Bell stood in the stillness of her new life, waiting for the man she had married in name, but not in soul, not yet. Ashthorne Hall awoke not with the joy of a wedding celebration, but with the brittle hush of cold civility. 3 mornings had passed since Agnes Bell had crossed its iron threshold, and not once had she been summoned by her husband. Not once had she been called by her new name. She wandered the corridors like a guest whose presence was permitted but not welcomed. Her footsteps muffled by thick Persian carpets, her breath visible in the chill of rooms that had not known warmth in years. The household ran like a watch wound too tightly, efficient, polished, and without soul. Servants moved with quiet purpose, avoiding her gaze, offering curtsies so shallow they bordered on sarcasm. The footmen spoke in whispers as she passed, their eyes darting, their mouths twitching. They did not laugh outright. Ashthorne was too grand for open cruelty, but their silence was sharp as frost. She learned quickly not to ask questions, not to linger. She became a figure in the periphery, present yet untouched. Mrs. Gilbride, the housekeeper, remained firmly civil. She spoke only when necessary, with clipped precision and no warmth. "Tea is served in the west drawing-room at 4. His Grace dines in the green salon at 8. You are welcome to take your meals privately until otherwise instructed." It was not a suggestion. It was a boundary, drawn with the grace of formality and the weight of quiet rejection. Agnes accepted it all. She smiled when spoken to. She walked the halls as if she belonged there, though every polished panel seemed to whisper otherwise. Her dresses, woolen and practical, brushed against mahogany doors and gilded mirrors, leaving no mark. She was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. On the second day, she found the library. It was vast, lined wall to wall with books bound in leather, velvet, and dust. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting an orange glow across volumes that smelled of parchment and time. She stepped inside reverently, her fingers trailing across spines, lingering on titles in Latin and French, histories of warfare, books of law, and weathered poetry anthologies. She felt more at home among words than she had in any room thus far. Settling into a high-backed chair near the window, she drew out her sketchbook. Its edges were frayed, the paper softened by years of touch. Her pencil glided across the page as she sketched the curve of the marble fireplace, the shadows cast by candlelight, the heavy velvet drapes that shut out the grey afternoon. She did not hear the door open. "You found the only warm room in the house." The voice came from behind, deep and edged with something she could not yet name. Surprise jolted through her, but she rose instantly, smoothing her skirts, turning slowly. He stood there, cane in hand, posture straight, eyes unfocused. The Duke, Gregory Ashbourne, was taller than she had imagined. Lean, almost severe, his frame held the memory of military command. His cravat was tied carelessly, his coat dark and finely cut, though dust clung faintly to one shoulder. His hair, ash brown, was unkempt, curling slightly above his ears, and his eyes, though unseeing, still held an eerie sharpness, as though they could burn through the soul despite their blindness. He tilted his head, listening. "Miss Bell," he said at last, not quite a question. "Or do I call you Duchess now?" Her voice caught for a breath, then settled. "As you prefer, Your Grace." He smiled without amusement. "What I prefer is not often considered." Silence filled the room. It was not awkward, it was taut. Agnes lowered her gaze, not in submission, but in protection. He took a step forward. His cane tapped once against the stone. "You've been here for 3 days. I am told you have kept to yourself, that you take tea alone, that you walk the halls like a penitent. I did not wish to disrupt the order of the house. Wise." His tone was cool. "Ashthorne does not tolerate disruption well." She wanted to ask why he had not come to her, why he had not received her like a husband would, even in duty. But she said nothing. Questions, she had learned, were often wasted on those who had already built their answers in stone. "I suppose you expect some form of acknowledgement," he continued. "A husbandly welcome, perhaps a gesture of approval or gratitude." She met his eyes then, though he could not see her. "I expect nothing, Your Grace. I was not chosen for affection." A pause. He seemed almost caught off guard by her directness. His brow twitched. "No," he said at last, his voice low. "You were not." He turned, the movement fluid, precise. His cane tapped once more, then again as he approached the hearth. He stood there a moment, warming his hands. His face was half-shadowed by firelight. There was a scar near his temple, a faded mark of something old and violent. "I will not lie to you," he said. "I agreed to this union under certain understandings, that you would be unobtrusive, that you would require nothing, that you would not attempt to fill spaces best left empty. And have I failed in that expectation?" she asked softly. He exhaled a breath that was not quite a laugh. "Not yet." He turned his face toward her then, eyes still clouded and distant. "But I must confess I had not expected—" His words slowed. "A limp." The room went still. Agnes did not flinch. Her spine remained straight. Her hands, clasped gently before her, betrayed no tremor. "I assure you, Your Grace, it does not hinder my duties." "That may be, but I do not recall being told. Perhaps no one thought it worthy of mention." His silence was louder than any insult. Agnes curtsied. "It was shallow, but precise. If that is all, Your Grace, I will return to my room." He did not respond. She left the library with quiet steps. As she passed through the gallery hall, lined with portraits of Ashbourne ancestors, she caught voices drifting from the servants' corridor. "Like a ghost, she is, slips around corners like she knows she doesn't belong." Another voice, younger, bolder. "Ghost bride, more like." Laughter followed, stifled but cruel. Agnes did not stop walking. Her cheeks burned, but her pace never faltered. She reached her chamber, shut the door, and removed her gloves with deliberate care. She sat at the vanity, staring at her own reflection in the mirror. The room was dim. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with a fury so quiet it resembled serenity. She had known this path would be lonely. She had prepared herself for indifference, perhaps even pity. But what she had not foreseen was this almost ceremonial rejection. She was not the Duchess they had imagined. Not fair, not graceful in the ways that mattered to them. But she was not fragile, not anymore. Agnes reached for her sketchbook and turned to a blank page. Her pencil hovered, then moved. Slowly, deliberately, she began to draw, not a portrait, but the stone arch of Ashthorne's library, the sharp line of the Duke's jaw, the cane, silver-tipped, tapping once against the floor. She drew in silence, but her mind stirred with words unspoken. "You will not see me," she thought, "but you will feel my presence. You will." And with that she returned to her sketching. Outside, the fog deepened. The house loomed silent around her, filled with secrets and shadows. But Agnes Bell, unwanted, uncelebrated, unseen, remained. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was her place now, and she would not disappear. The frost had settled thick upon the earth by the fourth morning of Agnes Bell's new life, dusting the hedgerows with silver and muting the gravel paths to a soft hush beneath her boots. Ashthorne Hall, though stately and vast, held an air of mournful stillness, like a cathedral long abandoned, echoing with the memory of prayers no longer spoken. Agnes began to fill her days with quiet rituals. She rose before dawn, when the world was still steeped in lavender shadows and the household not yet astir. Wrapped in her charcoal cloak and woolen gloves, she walked the estate gardens, now stripped of summer's bloom, but not of beauty. The bare branches of the hedges traced delicate patterns against the sky, and where the last of the ivy clung to the stone walls, frost laced each leaf like lacework, woven by unseen hands. She walked without haste, her limp marking a subtle rhythm in the silence, her breath clouding in the cold air. The gardens gave her solitude, and in that solitude she began to belong to something. Not to anyone, but to the morning mist, the creak of frozen branches, the hush that asked nothing of her. Inside the hall, she sought refuge in the library. No one disturbed her there. The room smelled of wax and dust, of bindings and secrets. She spent hours gently reorganizing the bookshelves, grouping titles by subject and period, creating a private order in a world that had none. Her gloved fingers lingered over volumes untouched for decades, Greek tragedies, treatises on military strategy, volumes of Byron and Wordsworth with uncut pages. One afternoon, while reaching for a copy of Plutarch's Lives, a leather folder slid loose from the shelf above. It landed softly on the floor, and curiosity guided her hand. Within lay a collection of war medals, tarnished but proud, and a worn map marked with fading ink. Routes, names, circles, arrows drawn in haste and desperation. Among them was a letter, dated from the Peninsular Campaign, folded but never sealed. Agnes did not read it. She returned it with the reverence of one placing flowers at a grave. That evening, in the firelight of the library, she began sketching again, not architecture or objects, but fragments of what she had seen, the sharp line of a ceremonial saber, a dusty cavalry jacket folded with care, but forgotten. The elements of a life that had once been fierce, now silent. She had not spoken to the Duke since their first encounter in the library. He moved through the house like an echo, heard, but rarely seen. Occasionally, she heard the tap of his cane in the corridors, the low murmur of Mr. Bennet's voice, or the creak of a door closing somewhere above. But their paths did not cross, and neither sought the other. Until one evening, just after twilight, Agnes stood near the hearth with her sketchbook open and her heart unusually restless. Something in the air, perhaps the wind rustling the ivy or the distant hoot of an owl, stirred her courage. She closed the book, smoothed her skirts, and walked with measured steps toward the study. The room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp. Gregory Ashbourne stood near the window, his posture straight, his shoulders squared. He had not heard her enter. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady but soft. He turned slightly, lifting his head. "Miss Bell, I wish to ask if you might like me to read to you," she continued. "From the library. If there is a particular author you prefer." A pause. His expression remained unreadable. "I've managed without literature for some time," he replied, cool but not cruel. "Of course," she murmured, already retreating a step. But then, "Though," he added quietly, "I suppose there is no harm in listening, if your voice is agreeable." She looked at him, surprised. "Shall I fetch something now?" He did not answer immediately. Then with a nod, barely perceptible, he turned from the window and walked toward the armchair near the hearth. She returned moments later with a volume of poetry, Cowper, chosen for its serenity. She did not sit across from him, but at an angle, respectful of distance. She opened the book and began to read. Her voice, though not dramatic, carried a quiet rhythm, like water over stones. As the verses unfolded, gentle lines about country life, light and sorrow, she felt the room breathe with her. Gregory did not speak, did not move, but his head tilted slightly. His brow eased. She finished the first poem, then the second. When she reached the end of the third, he spoke. "You do not stumble over the longer lines." She glanced up. "I used to read aloud to my mother." Another silence. This one felt different. "Cowper," he said after a moment. "He wrote much of darkness. Did you choose him for my sake?" "I chose him because he speaks gently." He turned his face toward the fire, and she could not tell if he smiled. The next evening, he did not call for her, but she returned to the study with a new volume, Keats this time. He said nothing when she entered, but the corner of his mouth shifted. She took that as consent. So began a fragile pattern. Some nights he listened. Other nights he asked for quiet, but he never sent her away. Their exchanges were brief, their words few, yet something stirred beneath them. The air between them grew less brittle, as if something invisible was thawing. Not affection, not yet, but the recognition of presence, the beginning of regard. One afternoon, as the snow melted into slush in the outer courtyards, Agnes returned from her walk and found Gregory standing near the conservatory doors, listening to the wind through the trees. "You walk the garden every morning," he said without turning. She paused. "Yes." "Even in frost?" "Yes." "Why?" She stepped beside him, not close but within reach. "Because it reminds me the earth is still alive, even when it looks dead." He turned his face toward her, his eyes blank but intense. "What does it look like today?" he asked. She blinked. "The garden," he clarified. "What do you see?" She hesitated, then let her gaze drift outward. "The path is pale with frost," she began slowly. "The hedges are bare, but they form neat walls along the walk. There are rose branches, black now, but delicate, like lace pressed against snow, and there are violets, small and stubborn near the base of the wall. They bloom even now. Their petals are so deep a purple they almost seem blue." He said nothing. His face remained still, but his breathing slowed, as if he were listening not just with ears, but with memory. "Violets," he murmured. "I had forgotten." She looked at him. "My mother loved them," he said, voice low. "She planted them in the south garden, said they were the only flower that knew how to be humble." Agnes smiled faintly. "Then they are well suited to Ashthorn." A pause. "You describe things well," he said. "Perhaps because I have always watched more than I have spoken." He nodded once. "That is a rare gift." The conversation ended there, but the silence that followed was not empty. It was shared. That night, in her chamber, Agnes sat by her own hearth with the sketchbook open on her lap. She did not draw violets, nor the path, nor the frost-laced hedges. She drew a man's hand, slender, long-fingered, resting on a cane, and beneath it, the shadow of a violet blooming unseen. Ashthorn Hall remained vast and cold, but something beneath its silence had begun to breathe. The morning began with the stillness that often precedes storms, not of wind or rain, but of lives interrupted. Agnes Bell awoke to a peculiar hum in the household. Not noise exactly, but a shifting of energy, a quickening of footsteps, a tension in the way Mrs. Gilbride set her tea down with too much care. Outside, frost had melted into damp mist, and the gardens lay soaked in pale silence. Agnes dressed with her usual modesty, choosing a deep forest green wool gown, her most dignified, though plain. Her hands, slender and pale, buttoned the bodice with practiced calm, but her chest carried a whisper of unease she could not name. She had just descended the main staircase when the front doors opened, and cold air swept into the entrance hall, trailing the scent of lavender oil and carriage leather. Lady Honora Marchmont arrived in a flourish of silk and superiority. The woman was tall and commanding, wrapped in an ice-blue pelisse embroidered with silver leaves, her gloved hands tucked into a fur muff the color of snow. Her blonde hair was styled in flawless ringlets, held in place by pearl combs that shimmered even in the dim light. Her posture was flawless, her chin high, her expression polished to a sharp, glacial edge. Agnes paused on the final step. Honora's gaze landed on her like a dagger sheathed in velvet. "Oh," she said, her voice as light as spun sugar. "You must be the Duchess." The words were not a greeting. They were an evaluation. Agnes descended the final step and curtsied with quiet precision. "Lady Honora, welcome to Ashthorne Hall." Honora's lips curled slightly. "How quaint. You sound as though the house were yours to offer." Before Agnes could reply, Mr. Bennet appeared from the side corridor. "Lady Honora," he said with a stiff bow, "His Grace is in the green salon. He has been informed of your arrival." Honora didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes never left Agnes. "I shall see myself to him. I know the way. Some rooms don't change. Others apparently do." And with that, she walked past, leaving a delicate trail of rose perfume and something colder in her wake. The green salon had not been used in months. Agnes had passed it often, the doors always shut, its curtains drawn. Now, as she lingered outside, voices floated through the oak panels. Gregory's deep tone, measured, weary. Honora's lighter, melodic, with a metallic undercurrent. "I came as a courtesy," she was saying. "Not to cause disruption, of course, but surely you see how this marriage appears to those who care about your legacy." Gregory's voice followed, lower, unreadable. "I did not ask for anyone's opinion, least of all yours." A pause. Then Honora's voice again, this time softer. "You cannot expect Parliament to take you seriously while married to, well, silence." Agnes stepped away from the door. That evening, dinner was announced with more formality than usual. Mrs. Gilbride had placed the heavy silver candlesticks on the table. The finest porcelain had been laid out, and a fire crackled in the hearth, unable to soften the tension that filled the air like perfume turned rancid. Agnes entered last. She had chosen her lavender walking dress, the only one with any embroidery, subtle near the hem. She wore her mother's ribbon at the base of her braid. She had drawn no rouge on her cheeks, no powder on her skin. She would not adorn herself like a doll to entertain a spectre from the Duke's past. Gregory sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He wore a dark wool coat and his usual loosely tied cravat. His eyes, clouded and pale, gave away nothing. Honora, seated to his right, looked radiant and cruel. Her ice-blue gown sparkled in the candlelight, and her eyes flicked over Agnes with theatrical sweetness. "I must say," she began as the soup was served, "I never imagined Ashthorne would host such domestic charm." Agnes took her seat without reply. Gregory's fingers tapped once against the table. "Did you come to dine, Honora, or to perform?" "Must the two be separate?" she replied, tilting her head with a smile. "I only meant that it's heartening, seeing you entertain such a novel arrangement. You were always so particular, Gregory. So difficult to please." Agnes kept her gaze on her bowl. She did not tremble, she would not. Honora's voice carried on like a lullaby meant to unsettle. "You know, my father was quite surprised. Still holds considerable influence in the Lords, you know. He said, and I quote, 'What madness overtook Devonmere to wed a woman sight unseen?' I told him, of course, that it must have been desperation." Gregory did not move. Agnes set down her spoon, her throat tight. Honora continued, "But then again, perhaps he simply wasn't told the full truth. It's quite easy to conceal details, a limp, a rather unfortunate one, if I may say so." Agnes raised her eyes slowly. "You may not." The words fell like glass shattering. Honora blinked, caught off guard. Then she smiled. "Oh my, the Duchess has a spine. How thrilling." Gregory turned his face toward Agnes, not Honora. "You are not required to remain." Agnes stood, her dignity intact. "Nor are you required to entertain guests who mock your household." Without another word, she left the dining room, her footsteps steady though her chest burned. She returned to her chamber. The fire had died down, and the shadows on the walls flickered like ghosts reaching for her. She lit a single candle and sat before her vanity, her hands trembling now that no one could see them. On the desk beside her lay her sketchbook. She opened it to the page she had drawn weeks ago, a soft outline of Gregory's profile, rendered from memory before she had ever known his voice. It was not a perfect likeness, but the brow, the line of the jaw, the mouth, silent and strong, were unmistakable. She stared at it for a long time, then she reached for the candle. The flame wavered near the paper. Hungry, her hand trembled, but she could not do it. She closed the sketchbook, pressing her palm against its cover as if to still the storm inside her. Let Lady Honora have her barbs, her father's whispers in Parliament, her silken cruelty. Agnes would remain, not because she was stronger, but because she had no need to prove herself to a woman who fed on appearance and fear. She had come to Ashthorne as a ghost. But something was stirring in her now. Not rage, not revenge, conviction. The kind that blooms only in soil watered by tears and lit by firelight. And somewhere, beyond the thick walls and drawn curtains, she knew he had heard it too. Not the words, but the silence that followed. The kind that leaves a mark. The wind began to howl just after sunset. By the time the grandfather clock in the front hall struck 7, Ashthorne Hall stood cloaked in shadows and trembling glass. Rain fell in torrents against the windows, and the branches of the old ash trees scraped the walls like long, accusing fingers. The fire in the library, though fed generously by Mrs. Gilbride herself, offered little warmth against the storm clawing at the foundation of the house. Agnes Bell sat alone, seated near the hearth, her sketchbook untouched beside her, her hands still in her lap. Her dinner had gone untouched as well, though the tray rested near the chair. Her thoughts, tangled and restless, refused to settle. The events of the past days had cut deeper than she had allowed herself to admit, and though she had borne them with grace, the wound had not healed. It had merely buried itself beneath layers of silence. The encounter with Lady Honora had left its mark, but it was not Honora's voice that lingered. It was Gregory's silence. His absence since that dinner had been deliberate. Not avoidance, not punishment. Distance. The kind of distance one crafts carefully, like a fortress built out of hurt. Agnes could not ignore it, nor could she carry it alone. She rose, her green wool gown brushing the floor as she moved toward the hallway. Her candle flickered in the draught that wound through the corridor, but she walked on, her steps slow but firm. She knew where he would be, his study, the one room that felt entirely his, the one place in the manor that pulsed with memory, not expectation. When she reached the door, she paused, not out of fear but respect. She knocked once. "Come in." His voice was low, hoarse, the timbre of a man worn thin. She entered quietly. The fire burned low in the grate, casting long shadows across the floor. Gregory sat near the window, his chair turned toward the glass, though he could not see beyond it. He held a glass of untouched brandy in one hand, and in the other his walking stick rested against his knee. He did not turn when she entered. She stood a moment in the hush, then stepped closer. "I came to ask you something," she said softly. Still, he did not face her. "That is your right." She hesitated. Then, with a steadiness that cost her dearly, she asked, "Do you regret it?" His fingers tightened slightly around the glass. "Regret is a nobleman's shadow, Agnes. It follows every choice." "That is not an answer." At that, he turned his head slightly. His pale eyes, clouded yet piercing, seemed to search the space between them. "No," he said after a long pause, "I do not regret the necessity." "The necessity," she echoed, her voice hollow. Gregory set down the glass with care. "You are not what I expected, but perhaps that is not a flaw." Her brow furrowed. "Then what am I?" He rose then, slowly, the motion heavy with fatigue more than pain. His shoulders were taut beneath his coat, his jaw clenched. "You are a mirror, Agnes Bell, and I have not looked into one in years." He stepped toward her but did not reach for her. His face, shadowed by the firelight, revealed a man not merely blind, but haunted. She did not speak. A gust of wind rattled the windows. Then he said low and without ceremony, "I do not regret the marriage. I regret that I met you with silence." Agnes's throat tightened. "Why?" He turned his face toward the fire, his voice a whisper. "Because silence is easier than grief." And with that he dismissed her, not cruelly, not coldly, but with the weary distance of a man drowning quietly. She left the study in silence. Hours passed. Night deepened. The storm outside turned violent, thunder cracking like cannon fire, rain lashing the windows in rhythmic fury. Agnes could not sleep. The candle beside her bed had long since melted into a stub, and shadows danced along the walls, echoing her unrest. Then, a sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping in the corridor. She rose and opened her door. Gregory was there, barefoot, dressed in only his shirt and trousers, his cane forgotten, his hands braced against the wall as he moved with disoriented urgency. She stepped into the hall. Gregory. He flinched, startled. His head turned toward her, but his eyes were lost in something deeper than blindness. I was trying to find... His breath hitched. I thought I heard him. Agnes approached carefully. Who? He pressed a hand to the wall as if to anchor himself. My brother, he whispered. He followed me. I told him I'd cover his retreat. I never saw him again. She reached for him, not to guide, but to steady. I should have turned back, he said, trembling. I should have waited. He was 17. God help me, he was 17. His knees buckled slightly, and she caught his arm. Come, she said gently. Sit. She led him to the bench near the window, helping him lower himself slowly. He obeyed, too far gone in memory to resist. The thunder roared again. Agnes sat beside him, close but not touching. She could feel the shiver in his breath, the weight of guilt that years had not lifted. He turned his face toward her, his features raw. I hear his voice when the wind rises, he said. Sometimes I think he's still calling me, as if time could bend itself, just to make me hear him beg me not to leave him behind. She reached out, slowly, deliberately. Her hand found his. He did not flinch. He let their fingers entwine. The contact was neither casual nor dramatic. It was steady, anchoring. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, time slowed. Gregory leaned forward, his forehead brushing hers, not in passion, but in surrender. You should not see me like this, he murmured. I do not see, she replied. I feel. A pause. Then he whispered, then feel this. And his hand closed around hers with the strength of a man who had finally allowed himself to fall. They sat there for what felt like hours, their hands clasped as wind and rain battered the manor. Words were no longer necessary. Breath, closeness, warmth, those became the language. In the darkness, stripped of expectation, they simply existed. When the storm began to ease, the silence that followed was not empty. It was filled. Their fingers remained entwined, neither pulled away. And in that space, small and sacred, something within both of them shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but irrevocably. The days that followed the storm unfolded like a fragile page, turned by careful fingers. Each morning came softer, the winds less cruel. And inside Ashthorne Hall, something long dormant stirred beneath the ancient stone and hollow corridors. Gregory Ashbourne no longer remained hidden behind doors and silences. It began with the smallest of gestures. He asked for her voice. Each evening after supper, Agnes would return to the library with a volume tucked beneath her arm. Sometimes poetry, sometimes prose, sometimes nothing at all. Only her own words, simple observations drawn from the garden, the changing sky, or the rustle of the curtains at dusk. He sat in the chair near the hearth, his hands folded loosely in his lap, head turned slightly toward her, as if listening not just to her voice, but to the world through it. Agnes never asked what changed. She feared naming it might chase it away. One night, as she closed the book, he did not move. The firelight brushed his face in shades of gold and shadow. Describe the light, he said suddenly. She blinked. The light? The way it dances, he said softly. I used to know how it moved across a face, a wall. I want to remember. She looked to the fire. It flickers unevenly, she said after a breath. It leans left, like it's being pulled towards something unseen. The flames are gold at the edges but white at the core, and it throws shadows, long and thin, like fingers reaching for something they can't quite grasp. His eyes fluttered shut. Yes, he murmured. "That's how it used to look." They said nothing more that night, but when he rose, he touched her hand in passing, a graze, no more than a second, and left the room as if the silence between them were sacred. Agnes returned to her chamber with her heart full, not with certainty, but with a feeling far more precious, possibility. The next afternoon, as she passed the door to the north salon, Mrs. Gilbride stopped her in the corridor. "A package arrived, Your Grace," she said, her tone neutral but laced with curiosity. "Brought by Ryder, marked urgent, left in the study." Agnes thanked her and changed direction. The study was dim. She lit a taper and approached the small table where the bundle had been left. Atop it, folded neatly, lay a sealed letter, its wax crest unfamiliar. She broke the seal with hesitant fingers. The letter was short, precise, chilling. It bore the hand of Lord Marchmont. It read, "I write with gratitude that you have reconsidered the unfortunate match arranged in haste. Lady Honora has received word that the annulment will be honored once formalized. It is wise that you acknowledge the disparity of rank, appearance, and dignity between you and Miss Bell. My daughter is prepared to resume her rightful place." Agnes stood frozen. She read it again and again. The words did not change. Her knees weakened, her breath shallowed. It was signed by Gregory Ashbourne. The penmanship was familiar, elegant, controlled. She could not breathe. The taper fell from her fingers. It snuffed itself on the rug in a puff of smoke. Without a word, she turned and walked quickly, quietly, back to her chamber. Her heartbeat was hollow thunder in her ears. She opened her trunk, pulled it forward, and began to fold her dresses with trembling hands. No tears came. There was only the sound of fabric being folded, the cold touch of brass clasps, the ache of knowing. She had not asked for love. She had only wanted honesty, and now even that had been denied her. She was placing her mother's ribbon into the side pocket of her satchel when she heard the door. Gregory's voice was low and sharp. "What are you doing?" She straightened slowly, meeting his unseeing eyes. "Leaving," she said simply. He stepped forward, his cane forgotten in the hallway. "Why?" She did not answer. He heard the rustle of garments in the trunk, the small snap of a buckle. "Agnes," he said again, more insistently. "Why?" She turned then, held out the letter. "Perhaps your signature will explain better than I can." He took it with both hands, ran his fingers over the edge, then opened it. As he read, the stillness in the room shifted, not anger, ice. When he finished, he folded the paper with agonizing slowness and walked to the hearth. He said nothing for a long time. Then he struck a match. Agnes watched as the flames caught the edges of the letter. She watched as the ink blackened and the words curled into nothing. Only when it had turned entirely to ash did he speak. "That is not my hand." Her breath caught. "I sign nothing I do not write," he continued, his voice low and dangerous, "and I would never send that woman, nor her father, such a coward's message." She stared at him. "But it bears your name, your seal. A seal can be stolen, a hand imitated, but not truth." He stepped closer, the light of the fire casting gold onto his pale eyes. "I left too much unsaid," he admitted. "I let silence grow where words should have lived. I made you doubt everything. That was my failing." Agnes felt her chest tighten. "I have lived years in the dark," he said, "but never until this moment have I feared being left in it." He extended his hand, slowly, as if offering not just his palm, but his whole self. "Don't leave me in the dark again." Agnes looked down at his hand. Long fingers, calloused at the edges. Strong, but open. She stepped forward. Her hand slid into his with trembling grace. He exhaled, as if life had returned to his lungs. The fire crackled beside them. Ash floated upward in thin spirals, and outside, the wind had finally stilled. She said nothing. There was no need. Everything that mattered now rested between their joined hands. In the heat of betrayal, a truth had emerged, not broken, but burning. And in the hush of that firelit room, it bound them in a silence stronger than any word. Spring did not arrive with fanfare. It came quietly, like a sigh released after holding breath too long. The snow receded day by day, giving way to damp earth and trembling buds. The lake, once sealed in ice, now shimmered with silver ripples beneath a pale sun. The air at Ashthorne Hall changed too, not in scent or temperature, but in weight. It felt lighter, as if something long buried beneath stone and silence had begun to rise. Lady Honora was gone. Her name was not spoken, not even in whispers. It lingered in the halls only as absence, and even that grew fainter with each passing day. And in the space she had left behind, something delicate bloomed. Gregory Ashbourne no longer lingered in shadow. He did not withdraw to his study for days on end, nor did he dismiss the rustle of skirts near his door. Instead, he began to listen, and not only with his ears. He began to say her name softly, easily, like something that belonged to him not by right but by rhythm. "Agnes," he would say as she passed his chair in the library. "Agnes," when he asked if she might describe the way the light struck the garden wall. "Agnes," with quiet wonder, when she laughed unexpectedly at a line of poetry neither of them had understood. The first time he said it, she had paused mid-sentence. Her breath caught, her spine straightened, her eyes wide. He had not noticed the effect, or perhaps he had, and chose, mercifully, not to mention it. Now he said it with the familiarity of breath. She learned his silences. Not all of them meant distance. Some were filled with thought, some with hesitation, some with a yearning that words would have ruined. He, in turn, listened to her movements, the sound of her fingertips brushing pages, the soft scuff of her shoes on stone, the faint tap of her pencil as she sketched beside the fire. They existed like parallel verses in the same poem, separate yet made richer in one another's presence. One afternoon, Agnes sat by the open window of the north corridor, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hair unbound for the first time since her arrival. The soft waves caught the light as she sketched the landscape below. The arch of the far hedge, the distant line of the trees beyond the fields, the first faint green of spring unfolding on the hills. Gregory found her there, guided by instinct more than habit. He stood near the wall, one hand resting lightly on the stone. "What do you see?" he asked, his voice barely above the breeze. She turned slightly, not startled. "Color returning," she replied. "The earth remembering what it means to grow." He smiled. "You make everything sound like it has a soul." She paused, her pencil hovering over the paper. "Perhaps because I see the parts others overlook." He moved closer, step by careful step, until he stood near the edge of the window. He did not reach out, but his presence warmed the space between them. "Describe yourself to me," he said quietly. She froze. "Not in form," he added, "in feeling." She looked down at the sketchbook, unsure if she could find the words. He waited. At last, she spoke. "I feel like the pages of an old book, worn at the edges, a little faded, but still holding stories no one's read." He said nothing. Then, almost reverently, "That's exactly how I imagined you." She turned her face toward him, eyes wide. He lifted his head slightly, his expression open. "Your voice in the dark, your quiet bravery, your scent like lavender and old pages. That's how I've come to know you." Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. "I may not see your face," he continued, "but I have learned the shape of your presence. It enters a room before your footsteps. It settles behind my ribcage when you speak." She lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. "You make me sound whole." "You are." He reached for her hand, not urgently, not to possess, simply to find. She gave it. His fingers traced hers gently, memorizing the lines. And then, with a slowness that made her forget to breathe, he lifted her wrist to his lips. He did not kiss her mouth. He kissed the inside of her wrist, where her pulse trembled beneath the skin, where no one had ever dared to notice the most fragile part of her. And then his voice, rough, low, near breaking, said, "I know your presence better than I know my own hands." Her heart gave a quiet cry she did not voice. For a moment, they remained like that. Her wrist to his lips, his hands wrapped around hers, the spring air drifting through the open window like a benediction. She did not need to speak. Everything he needed to know pulsed beneath her skin, steady and real. Later that evening, as twilight slipped across the estate and the lamps were lit one by one, Gregory remained near the fire in the library. and Agnes read aloud, her voice a balm, her words chosen not for their beauty, but for their truth. There were no declarations, no vows, only a glance, a breath, a closeness that spoke of something far more enduring than desire, recognition. The fog had not lifted all at once, but in its place, light was beginning to return. The first true day of spring arrived not with a trumpet, but with birdsong. At dawn, the frost had melted from the hedgerows, and the grass was wet with dew. The wind, once bitter and bracing, now carried warmth in its breath. The trees along the garden wall had begun to blush with tender buds, and in the southern corner of the grounds, half forgotten and cloaked in shade, violets had begun to bloom. Agnes found them one morning, kneeling in the garden with her skirts gathered delicately beneath her. Her gloved hand hovered over the small blossoms, their purple petals trembling in the breeze. She did not pick them. She simply watched, her eyes misted with something softer than sadness, deeper than joy. They had returned, despite the snow, despite the silence, despite the stones, and so had she. Agnes Bell no longer moved like a shadow through Ashthorne Hall. Her steps, though still marked by her limp, carried purpose. Her voice, once hushed in self-preservation, now filled rooms with clear and graceful cadence. The house, too, responded. The staff, once skeptical, now subdued, had begun to speak her name with a quiet note of respect. Mrs. Gilbride no longer called her Miss Bell. She had become her Grace. She wore lilac now, not grey. Soft gowns with simple embroidery, modest spencers with pearl buttons, and her mother's violet ribbon tied at the base of her braid. She laughed sometimes, though only with Gregory, and only in those rare and golden moments when silence became too full to contain. He walked with her now, slowly, through the garden paths, cane in hand, arm offered not out of obligation, but instinct. He called her by name with a kind of reverence. Agnes. Always Agnes. But beyond the walls of Ashthorne, the world had taken notice. The first letter arrived from Bath. Folded crisply, unkind in its elegance, it came under the guise of inquiry, concern even, but between the lines it dripped with poison. My dear Gregory, we hear strange things from Devonshire, whispers of a woman cloaked in plainness, made duchess in name but servant in origin. Say it isn't true, or if it is, do clarify. Has Ashthorne truly become a sanctuary for charity? Always devoted, L. Gregory read the letter aloud with a detached sneer. Agnes, seated across from him in the library, did not speak. The second letter came a day later. We must regretfully decline the invitation to the spring assembly. The guest list, we understand, has become unconventional. 3 more followed, each colder than the last. Rumor had spread, birthed in drawing rooms, fed by jealous mouths. They said the Duke had lost his mind, that he had taken in a disfigured woman. Some claimed she was a maid, others an orphan, and passed her off as wife. That Ashthorne Hall had fallen into disgrace, ruled now by a cripple with a sketchbook and a library card. They did not know her name. They did not care to. They had never needed truth to wound. The household felt the tremors. Servants exchanged glances. Mrs. Gilbride stiffened whenever the post arrived. Even the steward began to question whether the estate's standing could withstand such scandal. Mr. Bennet said nothing, but he stood a little straighter when Agnes passed, and lingered near Gregory more often than usual. One evening, as the firelight cast long shadows across the marble floors, Gregory summoned Agnes to the music room. She found him there, seated not at the piano, but near the window, hands clasped, face unreadable. He turned his head slightly as she entered. "There is an assembly in town next week." "I heard," she said softly. "They expect I will not attend." "And will you?" He paused. Then, without looking at her, said, "Not alone." She stepped forward, her voice steady. "If I attend with you, it will not be quiet. They will speak. They will judge." He nodded. "Let them." She hesitated. "Do you understand what it will mean? For me?" His voice was quiet. "Yes." She watched him, her heart full of something unspoken. Then he added more gently, "But I will not hide what matters to me." The words bloomed between them like a secret revealed. A day before the assembly, Agnes stood before the long mirror in her chamber, her hands clasped nervously at her waist. Laid across the bed was a gown she had never worn, violet silk, simple in its cut, but elegant in its drape. The color deepened where the light touched it, like the violets in the garden, humble but defiant. Mrs. Gilbride entered without knocking. She paused at the sight of the dress. Then, with quiet dignity, she stepped forward. "If you'll allow, Your Grace," she said, "I'll help you dress." Agnes turned. Their eyes met. No words were needed. That evening, as the carriage awaited in the courtyard, Gregory stood near the steps, dressed in his formal coat, silver-tipped cane in hand. His valet had combed his hair with care, and his cravat was tied precisely. Mr. Bennet approached from the shadows. "Would you like me to accompany you, Your Grace?" Gregory turned slightly toward him. Bennet added with calm conviction, "Let them whisper. You've walked through worse than stairs." Gregory gave a nod of gratitude. Then he turned toward the sound of footsteps on stone. Agnes descended the steps, her violet gown catching the light of the lanterns, her posture tall, her chin lifted. Her hair was pinned at the nape of her neck, a single strand escaping to frame her cheek. She looked like no one else in the world. He held out his hand. She took it. The assembly hall was lit with 1,000 candles. Crystal chandeliers shimmered. Music floated from the far end. Laughter, perfume, and silk rustled in every corner. And then they arrived. The room stilled, not with grace but tension. Heads turned, fans stilled mid-flutter, glasses paused halfway to lips. The Duke of Devonmere entered with a woman on his arm. She limped. She did not falter. She wore violet silk. Her gaze met theirs, cool, steady, untouched by pity. Some gasped, some whispered. One voice hissed, "Is that her?" Agnes did not blink. Gregory's voice broke the hush. "Her name is Agnes," he said clearly, "and she is my wife." No one dared answer. He guided her forward, not as a shield, not as a prize, but as an equal. They walked the hall from end to end, and in that silence, something shattered, not glass, not protocol. Illusion. The illusion that beauty belonged only to the unbroken, that dignity required the blessing of birth, that love must wear a mask to be believed. In the garden where violets bloomed, truth had taken root, and now it had begun to rise. Evening descended upon Ashthorne Hall with the quiet solemnity of a cathedral at twilight. The lamps had been lit, casting golden halos along the corridor walls. Beyond the tall windows, the last hues of dusk bled into a velvet sky, while the distant call of a nightingale echoed through the moor like a memory. In the library, the fire glowed low in the hearth, its embers sighing softly. Shadows danced across the spines of books, and the faint scent of old parchment mingled with beeswax polish and the delicate trace of lavender. Agnes Bell stood near the shelves, her fingers tracing the edge of a familiar volume. But her thoughts were elsewhere, anchored in the small, leather-bound sketchbook clutched tightly in her hands. For days, the impulse had haunted her, the desire to share it, the fear of being seen too clearly. But now, after the assembly, after the whispered cruelty had been met with unshaken dignity, and Gregory had walked beside her not as guardian or master, but as equal, as witness, something within her had yielded. She heard the tap of his cane before she saw him enter. He paused near the threshold, sensing her presence. "Agnes, I'm here." He stepped forward, slow and assured, until the firelight found his face. The light caught the scar near his temple, the one her pencil had memorized long before her hands dared touch him. She took a breath. "I have something to show you." He tilted his head slightly. "A book?" "No," she said, voice steady. "A truth." He waited. She guided him to his chair by the hearth, then sat across from him, not too far, not too close. The sketchbook lay in her lap, the leather soft from years of use. She opened it and turned it toward him. "I drew this before I knew your voice, before I heard your name aloud." His hand reached out, uncertain at first, then purposeful. His fingertips brushed the edge of the page, then slowly, reverently, they moved over the drawing. She watched him. As his hand traced the brow she had imagined, the solemn curve of the mouth, the faint shading where his beard now grew, his lips parted just slightly. "You drew this from memory?" he asked quietly. "From feeling," she corrected. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. His hand lingered at the center of the page, just above the heart she had sketched with almost imperceptible shading. Nothing obvious, nothing literal, only a suggestion that beneath the surface, something still beat. "I never expected to see myself this way," he murmured. "Not as others do. Not as I ever did." She leaned forward, voice trembling. "There's more I can tell you. If you want." He turned his face to her. "I want." So she began. "That line above your temple, that's your scar. It's deep, but it doesn't dominate your face. It's a mark of something endured, not something broken." He remained very still. "Your mouth," she hesitated, then continued. "It's not always stern. Sometimes it's quiet, as if it's listening more than speaking. Sometimes it's soft when you speak my name." He closed his eyes. "Your hands are long, elegant. The fingers never fidget. They search, but they never flinch." She hesitated again, then said softly, "And your eyes, though they do not see me, they feel, they hold weight. When they turn toward me, I feel known." A long silence fell between them. His hand slid from the page and reached for hers. She gave it. "You see with more clarity than anyone I've ever known," he whispered. Her throat constricted. Then gently he said, "And now, I want to see you." She drew in a slow breath. "I am not beautiful," she began, and already tears burned at the corners of her eyes. "That is not what I asked," he said, firm but kind. She nodded. "My hair is auburn but not bright. It doesn't shine unless caught in morning light. My eyes are grey-blue, some say stormy. My face, it's narrow. I have a faint scar on my chin from when I fell as a child. My nose is straight. My mouth turns down, even when I try to smile." His thumb brushed lightly across her wrist, grounding her. "I walk with a limp," she continued, her voice growing thick. "It's slight, but it marks me. It always has. People see it before they see anything else. They assume I am weak or broken or to be pitied." A tear fell, silent and unchecked. "But I am not weak," she whispered, "and I am not broken." "No," he said, his voice almost a vow. "You are not." She lifted her eyes, meeting his. "I have drawn myself 1,000 times," she confessed. "Always in shadow, always from a distance. But when I am with you, I wonder if maybe I could draw the light too." He reached into his coat pocket and removed something carefully folded. She watched, breath caught. It was the sketch, the one of him. He folded it along its edge and slid it back into the inside pocket of his coat, near his chest. "This is what I will carry into the world," he said, voice steady. "Your eyes, your hand, your truth." Her lips trembled. In that moment, she felt more seen than if he'd looked at her with perfect vision. The fire crackled softly. She rose, her hand still in his, and together they stood before the hearth, neither speaking. Then, as she turned toward the door, her head bowed with emotion too large for words, a figure appeared in the corridor. Mrs. Gilbride. She did not flinch. She did not scowl. Instead, she looked at Agnes, directly, fully, and with quiet solemnity said, "Your Grace." Agnes blinked, stunned. The old woman stepped aside, a gesture as graceful as any curtsy. And Agnes, breath-catching, stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones like warmth. The portrait remained on the table, open to the page that bore a man shaped by war, silence, and longing. But in that same room, something new had been drawn. A bond not of passion alone, but of knowing. A love not born of illusion, but of recognition. And a woman, once invisible, now walked forward, seen. Spring had come in full bloom. The air no longer carried the bite of frost, but the breath of awakening. The gardens of Ashthorne Hall, once veiled in snow and silence, now rippled with colour. The southern hedgerow had filled with violets, small, resilient things that opened each morning with quiet defiance, as if to say they had survived what others would not have dared. In the stillness of the Duke's study, a letter lay open on the polished desk. Its tone was formal, its message unmistakable. A petition. From the House of Marchmont, wrapped in the language of law, masked as concern for heritage and propriety, it was nothing more than a final attempt to undo what could no longer be undone. A challenge to the marriage. Gregory stood by the tall window, his back straight, his hands clasped behind him. He had read the letter once. He did not need to read it again. The lines were etched into his memory now. Accusations veiled as duty, objections phrased with icy elegance. The union, forged under misapprehension, must be dissolved. The young lady, we are told, bears a condition undisclosed. The dignity of the title demands it. As if dignity were a thing one could inherit. As if love must be approved by Parliament. He heard the door open behind him. Agnes's steps were soft, yet certain. She did not ask permission to enter. She no longer needed to. She stood beside him, her presence like a second heartbeat. "They've written again," he said quietly. "I know. I could answer with silence," he continued, "or I could send Mr. Bennet to deliver a reply they'll never forget." She smiled faintly. "But that's not what you'll do." He turned his face toward her, though his eyes could not meet hers. "No. I'll go with you," she said, before he could ask. He reached for her hand. Their fingers wove together like roots finding soil. That evening, the house stirred with purpose. The valet laid out Gregory's formal coat, pressing the collar and brushing each button until it gleamed. Mrs. Gilbride oversaw the carriage preparations without uttering a word of concern. Even the youngest footman stood straighter, as though aware that the household itself was about to speak through its master. Agnes dressed slowly, deliberately. Her violet gown, worn once before, had been cleaned and carefully pressed. The silk flowed around her like water under moonlight. Her hair, half gathered, half loose, was adorned with a single comb carved from ivory. No jewels, no paint, only grace. She stood before the mirror, adjusting the final button of her glove, when a knock echoed at the door. Mrs. Gilbride entered, holding a small velvet box. Agnes turned, brows raised. It was found among the Duchess Dowager's things, the housekeeper said, offering it without ceremony. She would have wanted it worn tonight. Inside lay a brooch shaped like a star, its center set with a small violet stone. Not grand, not ostentatious, but old and beloved. Agnes swallowed. "Thank you." Mrs. Gilbride nodded. "You carry it well." Downstairs Gregory waited, cane in hand, posture as dignified as any sovereign. Mr. Bennet stood beside him, dressed in his formal coat, every line pressed, his expression unreadable. The carriage was quiet during the ride to the assembly. Only the creak of the wheels, the beat of hooves, and the sound of breath passed between them. Agnes kept her gaze on the window, watching the world slip by. The trees were thick with leaves now. The village lamps glowed like constellations. When they arrived, silence met them first, then curiosity. Heads turned, conversations faltered. The assembly hall, brilliant with candlelight and filled with the scent of perfume and pride, grew tense. He offered his arm. She placed her hand upon it. Mr. Bennet stepped behind them, silent as a shadow. They entered. At first, the room froze. The orchestra hesitated, bows trembling mid-stroke. A murmur moved like wind through wheat, uncertain, shifting. She limped. She did not falter. He held her arm, not as support, but as declaration. The whispers began again. "Is that her? She's not even pretty. A servant's gait. Look at the way she walks. She dares to wear violet?" Agnes did not lower her gaze. Gregory's voice broke the hush. "Her name is Agnes," he said, his voice deep and deliberate, "and she is my wife." Silence followed, not because the words were shocking, but because they were irrefutable. He led her forward, each step echoing louder than applause. Not once did he flinch. Not once did she falter. They passed Lady Marchmont. She did not speak. They passed the Earl of Winbourne, who cleared his throat, but did not meet Gregory's gaze. They passed the Duchess of Claremont, who, despite herself, offered the barest inclination of her head. And then they stood beneath the chandelier, where light pooled like morning on snow. Agnes turned to him. Gregory lowered his head, brushing his lips to the back of her hand, not as performance but as reverence. She looked at him, eyes glistening. He felt her smile. Later, after the carriage returned them home and the household had settled into silence once more, Gregory entered his study alone. He moved to the mantel. There, hanging on the wall above it, was the portrait she had drawn. Not a formal painting, not an oil commissioned by name and title, a pencil sketch, simple, truthful, his scar, his stillness, his sorrow, his presence. It had been framed in silver, the edges carved with ivy leaves. Beneath it, on the marble mantel, lay his signet ring. He had not worn it since the night she nearly left. Now it rested on its side, forgotten in favor of something far more binding. He touched the frame. Then he turned. Outside, the garden waited. He stepped into the night, guided by instinct more than memory. The moon bathed the garden path in silver. He knew the way by heart. And she was there, kneeling among the violets, her fingers brushing petals that trembled with the breeze. She turned as he approached. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I've always been walking toward you," he said. She rose slowly, the folds of her gown moving like water. He did not speak. He lowered himself to one knee, not out of obligation, not out of blindness, but reverence. "For what I cannot see," he said softly, his voice a breath of vow, "I love most dearly." She reached for him, and in the hush of the garden, beneath the blooming violets and the hush of spring, they stood together, not as legend, but as truth. Devonshire, England's spring of 1822. The violets still bloom every spring. They appear at the edge of the south garden, just beyond the mossy wall, as if summoned by memory. Their color is deeper now, aged by time, perhaps, or made richer by the seasons that have passed. Ashthorne Hall stands much as it did before, but it is no longer the house it once was. Children's laughter echoes through the corridors. Books lay open and half-read near windows where little shoes have left muddy prints. The library, once a sanctuary of silence, now holds scattered sketchbooks, puzzles, and a handmade cradle tucked beside the hearth. Agnes Bell, Agnes Ashbourne, walks with the same grace as before. The limp remains, unchanged and unapologized for, but time has touched her hair with a warm softness and her gaze with quiet power. She wears a lavender gown as she walks through the garden with a child's hand wrapped around hers. Beside her toddles a boy of 6, his eyes the same steel grey as his father's, and his jaw already stubborn. His sister, barely 3, runs ahead on short legs, chasing butterflies with arms outstretched and a ribbon slipping from her braid. They call her Mama, and Gregory, now 41, sits on a carved bench beneath the ash tree, listening. He no longer walks with a cane, not because his vision returned, but because his gait found its certainty in Agnes's voice and the sound of his children's footsteps. His eyes remain clouded, but his world is clear. He rises when he hears her approach. She speaks first, as she always does. "They've grown." "I can hear it," he says with a smile. Their laughter has changed. She guides his hand to her cheek, and he rests it there. The touch has never grown old, nor has his reverence for it. They sit. Agnes leans her head on his shoulder. They listen to the wind, to the children's giggles, to the heartbeat of a life that was once only imagined. 8 years ago they were whispered about. Today they are remembered, not with scandal, but with awe. The courtship that never followed rules became the subject of poems in Bath. The drawing rooms that once dismissed Agnes now try to imitate her quiet elegance, her soft command. They call her the Violet Duchess, a name born of ridicule, reclaimed with pride. Lady Honora Marchmont married a viscount with 4 daughters from a previous union and moved to France after her father's influence waned in Parliament. Her name has not been spoken at Ashthorne in years, but there are rumours that her smile has never fully returned. Mrs. Gilbride still oversees the household, though her hair is fully white now, and her voice softer. Mr. Bennet, whose loyalty never faltered, now reads with the younger Ashbournes by the fire, guiding their fingers across lines of poetry, just as their mother once had. Agnes's sketches are no longer hidden. One hangs in the Royal Academy, titled Presence. It is the portrait she first drew of Gregory, shaded now with age and truth. Others have followed, studies of the children, the garden, the hall as it breathes in each season. Her name is signed in full, Agnes Bell Ashbourne. And Gregory, he writes now, not letters, not declarations, but notes kept in a box in his study beside her framed sketch, little things he never said aloud. On the first day I heard her laugh, I knew I had survived. I loved her before I ever knew her face. Her voice is the only light I've ever needed. Ashthorne stands not as a monument to wealth or lineage, but as a living testament to something far rarer. A marriage not built on appearances, but on the courage to see with the soul. As the sun begins to set, Agnes and Gregory remain beneath the ash tree, their hands intertwined, their children's laughter like music through the leaves, and the violets bloom, as they always do, as they always will. What a journey! Whispers in the Fog is more than just a love story. It's a quiet, powerful reminder that what the world calls imperfection can become the very thing that saves us. That strength doesn't always roar. It often walks softly with a limp through shadowed halls, carrying kindness like a lantern. And that the kind of love that lasts is not built on appearances, but on recognition, on the courage to truly see and to be seen. Agnes and Gregory's story teaches us that dignity is not given, it is claimed. That scars, whether visible or hidden, are not marks of weakness, but of survival. And that sometimes the whispers meant to shame us become the light that leads others home. If you reach this point in the story, we'd love to know you were here. Leave the word Violet in the comments so we know you walked this path with us, all the way to the garden. If this story moved you, even just a little, consider sending us super thanks to support the team that brings these historical romances to life. Whatever amount feels right to you, big or small, it means the world and helps us keep telling the stories we all need to hear. And if you can't support financially, that's perfectly okay. Sharing this story with a friend, a sister, or someone who believes love has no expiration date is another beautiful way to help. You'll find more unforgettable love stories, just like this one, in the cards we've left for you at the end. Go ahead and lose yourself in another time, another heart, another chance at love. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for believing in stories that heal. We'll see you in the next one.